All right, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Appian Community YouTube channel. I'm Jenny, and I'll be your host for today's live stream. If you're new here, we publish developer-focused learning content every week, so hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our videos. Today, we are diving into how to prepare your data fabric for AI success. Since AI is only as good as the data that powers it, we'll explore how to architect your data fabric to unlock the full potential of our AI capabilities. Before further ado, I'm excited to introduce our AI and data fabric product experts who will be leading today's discussion. Let me hand it over to them for introductions.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Kevin Gajewski. I'm the Director of Product at Appian. I've been at Appian for over 11 years and have spent more than a decade of that in our product team, working on all parts of the application design experience. I currently head up our data capabilities, so data fabric, which you'll hear about a little bit, anything around record types, CDTs, the cloud database, all the different ways we connect to and use data in your Appian applications. And I'll kick it over to Derek.
Thanks, Kevin. Hi, everybody. My name's Derek Noter. I'm a senior product manager at Appian. Been with the company for about 2.5 years, working in our automation group. And most recently, I've been working on a lot of our AI features. So some of the functionality that I'll show you today, such as document chat components, smart search, etc. So looking forward to it.
Thank you, Kevin and Derek. I am so excited to have you both today. Before we do jump in, I want to remind everyone that we want this to be interactive. Our product experts here are extremely knowledgeable on the topic of AI and data fabric. So use this opportunity to ask your questions, comments, or thoughts in the chat, and we will be addressing them live as we go. So with that, Kevin, I'll turn it over to you to talk us through a little bit about Appian's data fabric.
Sure. Thanks, Jenny. For a lot of you that have been practicing as Appian practitioners and developing apps, you're pretty familiar with our data fabric features. So I'm not planning on spending a lot of time on that. I want to just talk really quickly about that and then answer a few common questions that I still hear today. And then we'll spend most of our time on some of the new AI capabilities that leverage data fabric and some best practices around getting the most value out of those features. But first, if you haven't used Appian for a long time or you're not familiar, Appian Data Fabric is the way that you leverage your business data in your Appian applications. It's how you model your data that then is used in interfaces, processes. It's how we connect to different data sources, whether it's a database table or a web service. And there's a ton of different capabilities on top of that. Again, I'm not going to get a ton into it. But it is the way that you can very rapidly build a data-driven application on Appian. So with that, I'm going to actually switch over to my screen to show some of our product documentation, because that's where I want to start. So over here, we have this document browser. We essentially, for a few of our topics about the platform, we kind of make these nice browser experiences that kind of collect all the different pages related to that topic. So there's this awesome one about data fabric with, I think, 30-something pages, all nicely categorized. And what I wanted to do is start with a question that I still hear today. So we started shipping a lot of data fabric capabilities starting in, I think, the August 2020 release. So it's been about 5 years of capabilities. And you might be more familiar with sync record types, which is a lot of the features that when we refer to data fabric, it's based on that. And a thing that I hear still to this day often is, hey, I see you're adding a bunch of these cool capabilities. I have an app that I built 7 years ago that's running on some of our older data architecture. What can I do? I can't leverage whether it's a new AI feature or Process HQ. And I have heard that question a lot. So much so that we made a docs page and some community videos about this specific topic. So I did want to just bring awareness to this page that we shipped probably a year ago, which is about using synced record types for existing applications. Now, I'll very quickly go over some of it, and we'll post a link to it in the chat so you can access it too. First, I want to show, if you've got an app that was built a few years ago that's leveraging our old data features like CDTs and data serenities, it might look like this, right? You might have your source table that is maybe orders in this case, And then the common application design would be to have a data store that points to that RDBMS, that then has a data store entity and a CDT backing it. And then you use that CDT in your interfaces and your process models to do writes to update the data, right? Well, I don't expect, and no one expects you to go back and refactor your entire application to use sync record types as the only way that you reference that data. I know that we all have too many things in our backlog to go and prioritize something like that, right? But instead, what I do recommend is that you start to create sync record types on top of those existing tables that you do use in your application. So here's an example of like, if you were to start using some of these AI features that Derek is going to show, what you can do is from that same orders table that your existing application is based off of, you can create a sync record type that points to that same table. And then you can start using that in some of these new features almost immediately, right? These are out of the box things. You create that record type. It takes about 5 minutes to create the record type from the source, right? And then you can expose it in Process HQ for end users to have automatic self-service reporting on top of it, right? You can start referencing it in some of these AI features like Data Fabric Copilot, which Derek is going to also show us a cool demo in just a minute. And that's it. You just enable it, and then you have that version. Now, another common question I get from there then is like, well, now I have this other object that I have to try to keep up to date so that like I'm using the correct data in these situations. Well, the good news is actually that happens automatically for you, right? So even though you have your existing application that is using the CDT and data store entity to make updates to that record type, those, anytime you make an update in Appian through that framework, right, like that application design pattern, all of those changes are automatically reflected in the sync record types too. So there's nothing you need to do to your existing application. You're going to have this new object that references the up-to-date data set immediately and automatically once you create that sync record type version, right? So that's the like absolute easiest way you could start getting value from some of these new features just by creating that record type. Now, there are a couple other things that you could start doing, right? Once you do that and you have that record type, you could start opportunistically adding it in either like new parts of an application that you might be building, or if you happen to be doing a refactor for another reason, this is a place where you could apply some of these new features. But that's what I mentioned is probably the best place to start. There's a few other questions I just want to quickly get to that I often hear, and that will help you kind of be ready to leverage a lot of the new capabilities that we're shipping in the platform. So we have this other page that we shipped in the last year too, that talks about a lot of different best practices about what to do with data fabric features. And here's another common question that I get. Obviously, you can connect to any data source you want in Appian, right? It can be, and it can be any size, right? Like we always have the option to go directly to a data set and query it live. You could opt into using our data sync features for some of the other capabilities of the platform. I want to mention that like in the May release, the most recent release, we now have the ability to have up to 20 million rows per record type or table for sync records. So that's a pretty large data set compared to what our existing limits were before that. So before 2025, it was 4 million per record type, right? But even so, you might have a really large data source, right? And so in this document, we have a couple of highlights about how there's ways that you can work around that or best fit the scenario, right? So if you have a data set that is, for example, let's call it 100 million rows, right? But you only want to work on active, whether it's cases or requests, we have the ability to filter which data from the source you're actually pulling back into Appian. We also have other different capabilities, which you can read more about and link to from this doc, about saying like, oh, maybe I only want to see the latest 10 million rows at any given point, right? There's a feature for that. So I urge you also to look at this page. There's a ton of great content. I'll actually be referring to it later in the live stream for other reasons, as another example for ways that you can connect to data to leverage in sync records and your AI features without necessarily, kind of working around any constraints you might have based on data volume or data recency or legacy applications. And I think with that, we'll talk more about best practices a little bit, but I feel like we should just dive right in and start seeing some of these AI features. So I'm going to kick it over to you, Derek. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're going to show us?
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Kevin. So there are several features that I am excited to share with you today, and both demo a little bit and also kind of look under the hood and see how you can configure these in your applications. I'm going to talk about Data Fabric Chat component, Smart Search, and our Document Chat component a little bit. Starting with the Data Fabric Chat component. So this is an interface component that allows you to answer questions about your data fabric. So it enables you to have a conversation with your data to get some quick insights. We have some documentation here that we can share in the chat, but let me hop right into a quick demo of this. So here's a simple application I have here. Let me tell you a little bit about the kind of the shape of the data that we're looking at. I've got a record type that is for support cases. And that has the primary data here is going to be in the title and description field. So a pretty standard, type of data profile. But I also have some related record types as well. So I've got another record type with some case comments in it. And then I've got a couple of record types that are lookup or reference tables that have things like priority and status. So pretty typical data model that you all are probably quite familiar with in building your applications. So what we're seeing here on the left side of the screen, this is showing a list of those cases. You can see there's about 112 of them in total. And I'm displaying, the ID here. So we have sort of a reference to a unique identifier. So we can kind of more quickly identify some of these throughout the demo. And then I'm showing title, description, and using those related record, those lookup tables to show the status and the priority for each of them as well. And on the right-hand side here, we've got the Data Fabric chatbot. So in terms of what you're looking at, this is obviously embedded in the same interface, and I'll show you a little bit more later about what specifically it's connected to, but let me start with some demos here. So with this component, you can also have some suggested questions. So that's what these are here. These are some questions that we've specified to have available for users if maybe they're not sure where to start, or they don't understand what kind of questions can I ask of my data. So let's try this first one here to provide a count of cases by priority. So that's going to send a message to the Copilot. It's going to look at your data fabric, and then it comes back with an answer you can see pretty quickly. Okay, so it's giving me a count of priority, count of cases by priority, group by priority here. But you can notice we have this little. So well, how did I get this answer? So for any of these questions in the chatbot, you can click here to get just a quick summary of what was the logic or approach that the chatbot used to get this answer to your question. So in this case, you can see that it's telling you that it queried that case's data set, that record type, and then it grouped those results by the priority field and then counted the distinct number of cases for each priority level, right? So
that's cool.
Yeah. And our thought process behind providing this is with AI, even though it's been out for a while now, it's still a little bit new. People oftentimes, might be a little suspicious of how do I know I can trust this answer. So this is a really simple way for us to, show to end users and business users that this is the thought process that I used. And we'll go into a little more detail later. I'll show some more examples of this, including how you can debug, display some more information to help debug if you're getting answers that don't seem quite right or weren't as accurate as you'd like to, but more on that later. So you can clear out the conversation to get back to these suggested questions if you have them. Let me do this second one here, provide a count of cases by year and month. So again, it's going to send that off to a generative AI, to an LLM. It's going to build a query, and then it's going to use the results of that to provide that answer. And again, you can see the details here showing what was the thought process. So in this particular one, again, it's querying that same data set. And in this case, it's grouping those results by year and month using the created on date field. So it also gives you a little bit more of insight into, okay, when you bucketed these by month, was it the created date? Was it the resolved date? How exactly do that? So we know that, okay, in this case, it's actually looking on when was this case first created to do that grouping or bucketing, right? And then it counted distinct case IDs to determine the answer there. So that's a couple of canned questions. I can also say things like, let's list all cases that are in progress. So you don't have to just use the suggested questions. You can also type a question at any time here. Great. So in this case, it looks like there are, I think, about 20 cases or so here that looks like they are in progress. And then let's also do one maybe that's just sort of demonstrates. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, you went quick there, but I did notice that you had a typo and it still got it right, which is pretty cool.
Oh, yes, thank you for catching that. That's actually a great call out, is that not always, but a great amount of the time, because of the way in which all of these models have been trained, on realistic data where we make mistakes, and it's able oftentimes to determine the intent of what you were asking and still give you the right answer. Yeah, that's a great call.
Yeah, definitely a beauty of an LLM, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So what's another one here? Maybe something that does a better job of kind of showing like what the power and utility here of this particular component, right? Because we've got a lot of other great capabilities that allow you to run reports, have a lot of this stuff built into a dashboard, et cetera. But let's say you have a bit more of an ad hoc question where, I'm the IT support person, here, and, I'm hearing about something. I'm wondering, I see this one thing that mentions kind of like some issues with CRM. I can ask something like, do any cases mention CRM issues? So let's see how that goes. Okay, so in this case, this is a great example. So it looks like it was looking for cases that specifically mention CRM issues. So one of the things that's great about this particular component is that you can also kind of give it some guidance. So what I can say instead is, what's that?
I love that it's like a conversation. It's asking you follow-up questions just to clarify things too.
So let me see if I can give it a little sort of like guidance of like how I think it should, broaden the search result. And you can see in this case, okay, yes. So by giving it a bit of instruction, it found 3 cases here that mention CRM related issues. And it also provided the title and the description for those. So let's click on the details here to see like, okay, like what did it ultimately do to get the answer that I was looking for there? So it determined this by, again, searching that cases data set. And instead of like it did the first time around, searching specifically for CRM issues, which was a little too narrow of like a search term, it looks like, searching by CRM in the description field, it provided those results.
I mean, it really is like chatting with an expert of your data, which is really, really cool. I did have a question, Derek. How is Data Fabric Copilot, different from Records Chat, which we are familiar with or not familiar with? Are there reasons to use this versus, Records Chat, for example?
Yeah, that's actually a great question. So yeah, currently there are some use cases or reasons why you might want to use one component or feature over the other. Let me talk about Records Chat briefly. So, essentially the way that Records Chat component was built, the use case we had in mind when that feature was implemented was for asking questions about a single record or row in your data fabric,
right?
As well as any individual related records to that one row or record in your data fabric. So, for example, let's say we're looking at support case 345, and that's the individual piece of data we're looking at, and maybe it's got 10 related comments associated with it. That would enable us to essentially kind of interrogate and ask questions of zoomed into just that piece of data or that's and its related information in our data fabric. And to kind of help, maybe if it helps you, from thinking about it from a developer vantage point, what's happening under the hood, what it's using to do its querying ultimately is query record by identifier. So again, it's a specific record or specific row. Now the data fabric chat component, on the other hand, the one that we're looking at here, this one was really intended for a scenario of asking questions about any or all records or rows within a record type, as well as potentially more than just that one record type, as well as related data. So essentially like aggregated data is what this one was really sort of intended for. And again, what's happening under the hood there, what it's relying upon to build those queries ultimately is query record type, right? So that's going to bring back, a list of data, and aggregations and things like that.
And that's cool, right? Because
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, so like that's really great, especially if you've got like really kind of like the use case, you've got like a really clear one identified, and it's obvious from the outset that, oh, this is either going to be looking at like individual records or rows. I can use the record chat component, or I know that I'm going to be looking at like data in aggregate, and that's the kind of user experience or workflow that I want to build in my application. It would be the data fabric chat component. But we've also gotten feedback from users that sometimes they don't know, or they've got a use case for both, and they'd really love to have a more kind of unified experience. So it is something that's very much on our radar and that we're looking at in the future. So I can't mention anything specific, but I'd say like stay tuned, in the future for some features that are going to try and provide a more unified experience around that.
I love spoilers.
Yeah, spoilers. Okay, cool. Thank you for that question. Great. Okay, so that was some quick demo. Why don't we look under the hood a little bit and see, how this is set up.
As you're pulling that up, I just wanted to mention, because you talked about how both of the chat functions are using some of our data fabric query functions, right?
That's right.
And what's awesome about that is that like you're talking with the chatbot, the prompt that you give it, or like what the user inputs gets put. The LLM interprets what it means, and we've built it so that it understands what then it needs to form from an Appian perspective, right? And so then the AI agent is deciding what record query to use. And then it's just using our normal data fabric functionality, which means that like the data model you have set up, it's able to leverage. It means that any security, whether it's row level, column level, is applied. So you're never, have any worry about just exposing anything that isn't something that user should see. It's always going to be in the context of that user. So that's a lot of pre-baked, awesome governance that we have for you without you having to think about it.
Yeah, that's a really great call out. And that's what we're able to rely upon when we build this functionality that's ultimately, based upon data fabric and all the goodies that come along with that. Cool. So looking at the interface here. So again, like this is, the basic interface. We've got, a grid on the left-hand side here, and then we've got the chatbot on the right. So if we look at design here, we can see there's some simple settings. It's actually very easy to set up. There's really only one parameter that you have to specify, and that is going to be what are those list of record types. So you can see here that this is, I've got several base record types here, that original support cases record type. I've got the lookups for the priority and status, so it has access to that in some of those questions that I demoed to begin with in terms of grouping by priority, et cetera. And then we've also got a link to the comments there in case I'm asking questions that might need to be answered by some additional context that's provided, not from that original record, but some of the comments that have been associated with that record. And that's all you have to configure to get started using the component. Now, you saw that I had a couple of suggested questions there. That's totally optional, but a lot of times it's a good idea, again, especially if, in the organization or business where you're implementing some of this functionality, that it's still kind of new or you're still starting to embrace AI features. I think that that can be sort of like a helpful just kind of kickstart to get folks, give folks a sense of like, well, what kind of questions? How could I use this tool? And that's really easy to specify here under suggested questions. You can list up to 3 suggested questions here, and you can specify things like the icon color, and then the question itself. Okay, cool.
So when I'm like building an app, right, that's leveraging queries and stuff, surprise, surprise, I often have to kind of see what the query results are and tweak to debug when things are wrong. Dealing with a AI, co-pilot or agent feels like that makes it harder. Are there any things that we provide to make the just like development and debugging process better?
Yeah, absolutely. For this component in particular, we have this really handy debug mode. So you can enable it in design mode here. You can, of course, enable this, manually in expression. But let me turn that on, and then we'll go back and I'll show you what that looks like in the UI. This is really helpful for if you are troubleshooting, even just when you're first building, if you want to make sure that, as you said, you have more of an understanding of what query is being used to answer these questions. So I've enabled debugging mode for the chatbot here, and I'm going to do the same question again for consistency here, so we can kind of compare like what does it look like when that's turned off and on. Okay, so let me start here. There's a whole lot of stuff that just popped up. Let me start with just like ultimately like that's the answer that this results in. But if I scroll up here, I can see more of the thought process that the LLM is using to answer the question. So that gets exposed by you have this sort of thought where like based on the question, I provided, right? What does it think it needs to do to try and get that answer? So you can see its thought on like how it should do that here, right? And then that it uses, the LLM uses that then to figure out and construct the query expression to query your data fabric. And then you see the result of that query, which then the LLM uses to provide the answer. So you then see a thought of, okay, based on that result, what does it think the answer is, or does it need to do to kind of like answer the question that was originally posed by the user? You can see that, okay, I think this is what the answer is going to be. And then you see the final formatted one here and this last one is what is actually shown to an end user or business user, along again with that summary of its thought process.
Oh, that's awesome transparency into what it's doing.
Yeah, and you just had to click a checkbox, which is really easy to do. It's not some complicated debugging stack trace in like a developer IDE. It's just right in the same interface. That's really, really cool.
Yeah, it's particularly handy, especially if you've got, well, if you're just new to the feature and you're just not really understanding how it's working, or, if you're understanding like, oh, I don't necessarily know how I can trust this, this really kind of like lifts up the hood to show you what exactly is going on. So the LLM is really just involved in understanding, kind of parsing your question, figuring out then what query to run, and then it's running a standard query expression in the background, right? And then using those results to get the answer.
This is incredible. And it looks like a really great tool to discover your data with natural language. But what would you do, like if you weren't quite sure what to ask, for example, and you just wanted to do a bit more of that discovery work?
Yeah, sure. So that sounds like that's the kind of thing where I think maybe something like Smart Search, might be, a good feature, a good fit. So that's probably a good transition into that feature. So Smart Search is one of our newer features that we released that is an AI-powered semantic search of your data fabric. So this type of search is going to be particularly helpful when users might not know exactly what it is they're looking for, right? And maybe they need to kind of cast that net a bit wider, where kind of your traditional like keyword searching or filtering, is not necessarily going to get them what they're looking for or all of what they're looking for in their data fabric. So let's look at a simple use case here, again, using the same data set, but using a component that I think you're all going to be very familiar with, which is going to be the read-only grid. So with this, we've implemented support to do semantic search or smart search, utilizing the built-in search for read-only grid. So I'm going to show a couple things here. I've got like a little toggle I built into this interface that lets me do traditional keyword search. I'm going to do that now for just say server is down, right? You can see of those 112 records, I'm getting these 3 results right here. And again, that's using, what everybody's familiar with in terms of like that, exact keyword matching of like server and down. Now, let's see what happens if I toggle this to use that keyword search in combination with that smart search or semantic search. So out of those 112 results, I now get more. I get up to 12 results in this case. And you'll note that in some of these results in particular, you're seeing sort of the usual stuff you might expect to see in a keyword search like we did just a minute ago, but you're also seeing stuff that isn't verbatim server is down or server down, right? You're seeing some things here like server hardware failure, right? You're seeing web server failures, right? Frequent server reboots required, right? And again, this is looking at, in this particular case, the title and the description field, trying to find stuff that is semantically similar to the thing that I search. And that's where the AI comes in. And we'll get into a little bit more of the details of exactly kind of how that works and what's going on there. Let's see. Oh, this would be something that's good to look at. So remember in the last one with data fabric chat component, we asked like, oh, like how many issues, are CRM issues? So actually, let me do this first. Let me look for just your traditional like keyword search, because this was ultimately, the kind of thing that the Data Fabric chatbot was relying upon. You can see like, okay, I just get this one case for CRM issues, right? And if I do, if I expand that to just CRM, right, I get, some more issues there, but nothing that's verbatim CRM issues. Let's see what happens if I search for that same thing utilizing keyword search as well as smart search. So you can see, okay, I get one more result than just searching for CRM, and I'm still searching CRM issues. And you'll note here that I've got some scoring, which we'll talk about a little more, where these first three, it looks like, okay, it's sort of like we consider these to be good, and this one's just okay. And that makes sense if you sort of like scrutinize these a little bit and look at, in the first three or so, like CRM is definitely appearing quite a bit. But this one where I thought like, well, this one just may be okay. Like maybe this is what you were looking for, but maybe not. You can see, well, support ticket system errors, right? Users are facing errors when trying to submit or update support tickets, right? So, okay, well, CRM is customer relationship management. So maybe that's very much how you're using the support ticket system as part of that. Maybe not. So it's like, it kind of depends upon like your particular use case. Is this a good match? Is this not? But that's why this one potentially came back as something that, well, we think this might be a match.
Yeah, I love that they have the score too, like the confidence score, so that you can see really what's relevant, most relevant, all the way to things that may be related to it. That's really cool.
Right. And that is also an important call out too here, where like it's specifically not exact match. It's not a keyword match. It's really looking for something that it thinks is semantically similar,
Right.
To ultimately what you're searching.
Kind of going back to that question of like, what do you do when you don't know exactly what to ask? It's nice because you can kind of look at the area that you're interested in, but it'll give you more results than just that very narrow definition.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, I'd love to show you what it looks like to configure this. This is actually very easy.
Yeah, you made it look easy. I'm curious what it actually...
Yeah. So you can see no tricks up my sleeve here. This is a blank interface. I'm starting totally from scratch, and I'm going to move some stuff around here. So let me just search for read-only grid and drag that in. Right, so I've got this read-only grid component, right, and you'll notice that the data source selected is record type. And then I'm going to search for and find that same case record type that I've been using, pulls in and populates a number of columns, stuff that you're familiar with. Let me remove a couple of these just to kind of clean up and give us a little more room to work with and make it a little more similar to the demo screen here. And you can see, okay, great. So there's that data, the same total 112 rows from the demo here. And by default, when you pull in the read-only grid with the release of Smart Search, this is still going to be configured just for that keyword matching. And you can enable Smart Search by setting a similarity score threshold here. So I'll do that in a second, but again, let me just show you quickly. Server is down. And you can see, again, those same three issues. But now let me set this similarity score threshold to the same one that I used in the other demo interface here. And now that I've set that, let me again do that same server is down search. So by indicating a threshold above what, lower than one is going to give you just keyword searching essentially. Anything lower than that is going to instruct the component, the function, to that it should ultimately do a smart search as well as that keyword search. So in this case, you can see it's done that, and I've gotten those same 12 results from the demo previously.
Very cool. Derek, I do want to interrupt. We have a question in the comment,
Sure.
and we may have touched on this slightly before, but Jacinth Salins is asking, there's record level security and it's role-based, but does record chat have access that may expose sensitive data, or can chat responses be restricted?
This is asking specifically from the record chat component.
Specifically. So it might have been referring to slightly beforehand, but.
Yeah, as Kevin was mentioning, right, like these components are ultimately built upon Data Fabric. So any of the security, the record type and row level security that's at play there should also be adhered to and observed when using those chat components as well. It's a great question.
Yeah, and you, I mean, you weren't showing the configuration experience for the chat component, which I think is fine, but like actually you did. You selected
Just briefly, yeah.
Yeah. But the app developer is the one that defines the scope of what record types you can even interact with, right? So on top of the sort of application security, the attribute-based access, role-based access that you set up in Data Fabric, also the app developer curates what's there.
Yes.
And like we talked about a little bit earlier, is that the Copilot doesn't have just access to the data set. What's happening is we're giving it what the user's asking. It's figuring out what query to build, then queries Data Fabric, just like your app would query Data Fabric. And then it's only getting the data back that user would see in your app anyway. And then it gets just those results. So there's not really a chance for any other data to be provided to the LLM or to the end user than would be the same as your existing Appian application logic.
That's right.
That actually leads into the next question from Billy. He's asking, are there any definitive lines drawn so far on how complex a query the chatbot can construct? For example, custom fields, record relationships, query logic expression with nested logic. Is there something like that?
That's a good question. I know there are some limits to it. I don't know offhand, but that's certainly something that we can follow up with asynchronously or offline,
It definitely has access to the fields that are available and the relationships that you allow it to have. And we'll talk a little bit about this in the best practices section too.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I'll say is send us your use cases. Like, we'd love for you to try it. And if you're doing a prompt, like if you're asking a question and you're not getting something as reliably as you'd like, we want to hear that and figure out what we need to do to tweak our model. So please give us that feedback.
Yes, please. If you have access, to support, you can reach out to them with your questions, but also I'd encourage, posting on community, which we're always monitoring, responding to. So that would be a great place if you got some things like Kevin said that's not working, or you just have more questions about how exactly to best implement the feature.
Amazing. All right. I think that's it now in terms of questions. So I'll bring it back to the demo.
Yeah, thanks. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep going here. So you saw I set, just as a reminder, so I set, dragged in the read-only grid. I've set a similarity score threshold, and that's all you have to do to start using Smart Search. But there is one prerequisite that I am skipping over a little bit that we'll talk about, is that I did pull in a record type that we've enabled for Smart Search. So let me show you what that looks like. So here's that same cases record type. So in record type designer here, right, like here's the data model, pretty typical, profile in terms of what's listed. Again, data preview, title description, kind of your usual suspects here. And you'll notice that we've got this new Smart Search tab. So this is where you can go and enable Smart Search over specific fields in a record type. And the fields that you can currently select are going to be of type text or document. We'll talk more about document field a little bit later. But so again, in the data model here, right, I've got the title and description. Those are of field type text. So those appear as something that could be selected and enabled for Smart Search. So it's as simple as checking those boxes off and saving the record type. And that will trigger a data sync, which is ultimately what we're hooked into for Smart Search to know that, okay, there's some data that we need to make available for Smart Search, as it gets triggered by that same data sync. Cool.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that the checkbox is sort of underselling what's happening here, right?
Yeah, it's a great call out. So like there's a ton of complexity that we really intentionally are trying to abstract away from a user in terms of things like identifying what is the embedding model that I need to use, like setting up and maintaining a vector database, like figuring out the data pipeline, for how to query that and keep the data up to date, et cetera. It's like we're really trying to make this as easy and fast to implement as possible in a customer's data fabric. The main thing that it requires here, right, is going to be a sync record type. And then I think so in addition to Smart Search, just a couple of things to kind of point out. So it's as simple as enabling, once you've identified your use case and you figured out what are the specific fields that would be most valuable to provide that semantic search over, it's initiating, selecting those and saving them. And then down here in the sync history, in addition to what you're used to seeing in terms of the record sync, we also have a tab here that shows the status of that ingestion for Smart Search. So this is where you can see that was successful, as well as see if there's any issues that might need to be need some troubleshooting and remediation when you're enabling that. Okay, cool. Any other questions or stuff or thoughts around that, or should I move right along to a slightly more complex use case with Smart Search?
Let's look at the complex use case.
Okay, sure. So the first one we looked at here is just your simple kind of read-only grid, but you can also do stuff that's a little bit more complex, and something to keep in mind with Smart Search is while it can be really valuable by itself, it's ultimately a building block in all of the features and capabilities that are available to you in the Appian platform. And this is going to work really well in a scenario where you're using some pretty standard and typical type of query functionality like global fashion query filtering. So in this particular scenario, we can combine so I've got keyword and Smart Search. We can combine that same semantic search you're seeing with traditional filters to enable you to further refine and look what you're looking for. In this case, let's say I'm looking for servers down, but I specifically want to zoom into just the high priority cases that have been filed. So it's great to use as a companion to some of that existing functionality as well. And why don't we look at what that looks like for some of these like more complex use cases. So if we look here, this is the query filter that is being used in Smart Search. So the way that this ultimately works, if you're doing a more advanced use case, is you're going to be using, the abang query filter, function, which we're all familiar with, right? And we've got this new operator called search. So that is what is indicating that, okay, like when I'm searching, right, the value that's this local search term that we're passing in, what it should do is specifically try and do a semantic search. And you can see here that those two fields I told you, or that I showed a minute ago, that we've enabled for Smart Search, of title and description, you can see that those are indicated here within the function, so that this is the field that you should be searching over. I want you to do a semantic search or a Smart Search over that, and I've got one here each for a title and description.
That's easy.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Again, we tried to take away as much of the complexity as we possibly could. One area where we did need to also, we couldn't totally abstract away all the complexity, it is something that's good to know about and we should chat a little bit about is, I talked a couple times and I showed you setting a threshold for like when to include semantic search results. So if you're doing something that's more manual like this and you do a query, you could get all those search results and then kind of use your own judgment as to determine, what's a good result here. You can sort by, most to least, in terms of in descending order in terms of the similarity score. But you may also want to set like a minimum threshold to say like, okay, like I only want to see things kind of that are above this score in terms of like how similar the LLM thinks the data is. So the way that you do that again is using a query filter. And we've got some new fields here. Let me show you a little bit more in terms of what it looks like. So for this record type, you can see that we've got this new .search results, and you can see for all search field. Oh, here, let me refresh. I think this isn't loading everything I want to show you. Let me start over here. Record type, case. There we go. Let me refresh the screen. I think maybe
it's search results all searches.
Yeah, and I think maybe I just had this window open a little too long. So let me refresh it real quick.
We were prepping for it to make sure that we could give you guys this demo. So it's been open.
There we go. Yeah, so you can see in the pills here, we've got the record type domain, and then for that case record type, and then search results, and then all search fields, and similarity score is something that we can expose. Oh, and it's not happy because I'm deleting things. There's similarity score, there's source content, which is the snippet, that it's matching against, and then it can indicate like which field specifically if you're searching multiple fields that came back. So that is how you would specify when you want to filter based on what similarity score is coming back is. Oh, I see why it was yelling at me. I'm in the wrong part here. Let me find
Okay,
my...
so that's the way you would, like, if you want to expose that column you had that was like, oh, this is a good result, or like a good match, or if we wanted to show like the actual text of what was matching, these
Yes.
are the fields that you use to do that in your UI.
Yes, exactly. So
Okay.
whenever it returns a search result, obviously we're going to have access to things like, well, what row specifically, did it match? But you can also have it, if it's matching over multiple fields, you can have it return the value for what is the actual like snippet, or information that was matching against, what was the similarity score, that was generated from that search, and as well as then, oh no, that's everything. And then the similarity score itself you can return. But yeah, so sorry, I just want to make sure I kind of highlight so that in terms of if you want to set that threshold and you're doing it using a manual, query expression here, it's a query filter. You specify for the record type and then drill down into search results, all search fields and similarity score. You can have your operator, in this case we're doing, is greater than or equal to, and then you can set a value for what you want that threshold to be. And this one's a little more complicated, right? We're passing it in with local variables, but I think that's something that most developers are going to be pretty familiar with in terms of how you build your interfaces. Okay, cool. I think that is a great thing here. There's one more. Well, actually, how are we doing on time? We should probably move along. I'd say really briefly, there's some other really powerful things you can do with Smart Search in terms of finding things like similar information, which is really great.
Cool.
Yeah, this is a really great thing in sort of a use case of, again, this is that same set of IT use cases. We've got information here, we've got this list of cases. I love to find things that might be similar. So this is using the text, the title field to then do that Smart Search and then return. These are all the things I think might be similar. And you can empower a workflow like potentially finding duplicates, merging those cases, et cetera. So there's quite a lot that you can do with this functionality.
Actually,
oh, go ahead, Jay.
I was just going to say, I know that we had a question about like how to address industry specific challenges using Appian's data fabric and process automation. So, for example, healthcare, financial services. I feel like this would be a really good sort of use case for, industry specific use cases where you can actually kick off a process from it.
Yeah, absolutely. You can certainly put Smart Search in a process. That's another way that you can use it as a building block, right? Is you could create a process model where you're running a search result, you're running a search against your data fabric, you're getting those results back, and then you could feed that into Prompt Builder to potentially refine those search results or do additional actions such as suggest next steps in a troubleshooting workflow. There's quite a number of things that you could do in a more complex automated process with Smart Search as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we actually do that internally. Like this example you mentioned, we do it both in UIs for some like kind of triaging of stuff, but also in process where we call it and check, kind of do automated triaging and like straight through processing of like checking if there's duplicates of requests that came in. So for like our product use cases and IT requests, we're doing some of that stuff on our own instance of Appian, which is, I think, a great, not obvious use of search, but like a really cool use case that this unlocks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. How are we doing on time? Do we have time to show a bit of like Smart Search and the document chat component, or do we need to move along to some of the best practices here and wrap things up?
I think we could quickly show documents because I think it's a really good use case. We'll just do that really quickly, and then we'll dive right into the best practices right after that.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll keep this really quick so we've got time for some of those best practices. So this is, again, a combination of both Smart Search as well as document search. And what this is showing is doing that semantic search over documents. So let's say that you might have this like collection of like Apple support manuals, and I want to know like, how do I switch iPad apps? So that's something that I can search to find out like, well, what document might have the answer I'm looking for. You can see one at the top here is good, and the rest of these are all kind of like, well, not so great. I can then select and view one of these, and then I can chat with this document. So I could say like, how do I switch iPad apps? So then what this is doing is using that same document, and then ultimately similar to record chat component or data fabric chat component, it's using the document itself and sending context to the LM to try and see how can I answer this question. And you can see it gives me a quick summary of like, that's how you could do that. So again, you can combine these features together to enable like a pretty powerful workflow that enable you to get a lot more out of the data that you already have in your Appian environment.
That is awesome. I do have a question in the chat actually relating to the threshold that you just mentioned earlier. Does the threshold affect costs, and is there like an optimal recommended threshold to put into your configuration?
Yeah, that's a great question. The threshold itself doesn't affect the cost of something, but it is something that you would want to consider based on your workflow for if you're trying to provide like the best possible results and you don't just want to provide everything, right? Again, it's not an exact keyword matching, right? It's specifically not that. So depending upon what's the data that you have, what's the data quality, what search result are you doing, the only best search results it could have that it thinks are maybe semantically similar might be very weakly semantically similar, and ultimately not really kind of a good search result. So it is something that might be important based upon your use case to set as a threshold. We have some general guidelines in the documentation of like a good starting point, but it's ultimately something that you're going to want to fine tune and test using your actual data and use cases to ensure that you're getting like the best set of results that you want.
Yeah, and great question. Yeah, really, really good question. Speaking of guidelines, we can pass it off now to Kevin to talk about, some of these great features and best practices that really help ensure, maintainability, scalability, performance, and a smoother experience based on your use case, just like Derek was mentioning. So I'm going to hand it off to you, Kevin, to dive into some of these best practices to set up your data fabric for AI.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Jenny, and thanks, Derek, for walking us through all that. That was awesome.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you so much for the time and attention.
So, Derek is screen sharing, and he just pulled up that page that I mentioned earlier, which is our Build Your Best Data Fabric page, which has a ton of best practices about how to leverage the newer data fabric features and what considerations you should have. I did want to call attention to the Provide Meaningful Metadata section. If you want to go and click, on the browser down there. Yep. On the right-hand side, right? Because what this is going to help you do is add the information that will then make any of the AI features smarter and be able to more reliably get you the types of results that you need. There's a ton of content here. We're not going to be able to cover all of it in a few minutes left, but I did want to call that out because there's a lot there that we'll want to talk about. So also there's a specific section called I think it's AI specific best practices. Mm-hmm. You want to click down there, right? And that's telling you some really specific things. And in particular, it will help a lot with Data Fabric Copilot and Records Chat. So we'll cover a few of those, but that's sort of, I just wanted to bring awareness for everyone about that. All that content is there and available, and want to get your feedback on what else you think we should add in there. We're all learning, especially with generative AI, we're all learning at the same time about what's the best practices and what things actually help with prompting. So your usage will help us inform how we can make the product better over time. When it comes to best practices with these AI features that leverage data, I kind of have this 3 C's approach, right? Which is context, clarity, and consistency.
Yeah.
I like that, Derek kind of mentioned to me as we were prepping for this live stream of sort of how AI agents or copilots are kind of like a new employee, right? How, what would you tell the new employee doing a task to make sure that you get the outcome that you want, right? So you want to be really clear in your instructions. You want it to have the information that it needs, and you want to eliminate things that might be confusing, right? So that's where the context, clarity, and consistency stuff comes in, right? So, if that's all you remember from the best practices, I think that would be enough to take away. So how does that boil down to actual Appian implementation stuff? If you were to go back to the metadata section in the docs, actually, Derek.
Oh, sorry.
Really
yes,
quickly, yeah. I just wanted to, if you go back, to it's the third or fourth one, providing meaningful metadata.
Yes, thank you so much.
So if you scroll a little bit, you'll see that it's talking about how we name things, what descriptions we put on our record types, and what information is there. It sounds simple, but it makes a pretty big difference.
It really does.
And so, I definitely want, actually, Derek, if you could switch now over to Record Type Designer, we can talk a little bit more about some of that. So first thing, is your record type name and description, right? Like you want to make it obvious what the data set is, because in a Copilot scenario, it's going to go and look at the available record types it has to query and try to figure out which one is the right one based on what the user inputted, right? So a good name maybe sounds obvious, is important. And then the description of the record type is also important. So if you don't know, right, every record type has every design object in Appian has a description, right? So if you go to the properties menu, and we can see, Derek.
I'm a good example of what not to do. So this is some place where ideally I would have a description, such as, contains IT support.
All in there.
Yeah.
Man.
Description.
Hey, you know what? It answered some questions pretty well without it. But yeah, so this is where you'd want to add clear descriptions about what data is in that record type and what's the business context of this record type. You'd want to avoid some of the developer jargon and be really more like business friendly terms, because that's stuff that the AI agent would be able to understand better. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about different types of places where you add descriptions. Anything that you might add over time, to field descriptions, or anything that you're going to say multiple times in different description fields, instead bubble that up to the record type level, so you're not duplicating information, because then it's information overload for the AI agent. So that's another best practice that we found works really well. Next up, we do have friendly names and descriptions for each of our fields. So if we go to the map record fields dialog, right, you can see all the way on the right hand side, there's friendly display names and then descriptions. And this will go a long way as well, right? Like you want to describe what these fields mean. If it's really simple and self-explanatory. Now for again, as someone not familiar, if you assess it like that, then you don't have to add anything. But if there is some business important information, then you should add it, right? And so some of the things that we've seen go a long way is storing usernames consistently and describing them, right? And in the description saying what they look like. If there's a field that is doing something like a soft deletion or as a status thing that there's some business context for, mention that in the description so the agent knows that I might say, tell me about deactivated support cases. And I don't know, we use a different name there, it can kind of infer that based on the information it has.
Yeah, the Data Fabric chatbot in particular, that component, has an ability to specify what the formatting is for a username. That's a great call out. It's got a default, I think it's a first name, last name, but if you're using a different variation, that is something that you can kind of inform the chatbot that this is the pattern to look for.
Nice.
But yeah, as you said, having a consistent name, things like that, that's going to be really, really critical.
Yeah. And I think that this is a really good reminder to kind of think about how the description actually improves your AI chatbots, because I know when I was developing applications, you're so used to your own application and being in it all the time. Some things seem very intuitive to you, but again, I like the idea of thinking about the AI as a new employee that has to onboard and ramp up on everything.
Yeah, absolutely. So another great example here is if there's valid reasons why a field might be empty or null, or there's some really common value that might be sort of nonsensical because it's something that's reflected in the database, spell that out in the description because you want the Copilot agent to know about that. I think those are sort of, I already mentioned duplicating context, try to avoid duplicating information in each one because then it's information overload. But those are some of I think the core ones that we have found that help the AI make better decisions on what fields and records to pick. So yeah, if you want to click out of there, I think the other one that I just want to quickly mention is relationships. Yeah, so
that would be a good one to talk about. Yeah.
Of course, most inquiries about data or questions involve more than a single table of data or entity, right? So we have Data Fabric that kind of links a ton of different data sets together, and so record relationships, that concept plays a big role in all of these features, whether it's search because it can go across relationships or the Copilot, right? And so some of the best practices that we tell folks are to make sure that you're adding bidirectional relationships. So in this example, we're seeing, we're on the case record, there's a priority table for reference data. Well, we don't have to do it right now, but you'd want to drill into the priority record type and make sure that it also is pointing to the case record. That gives you the most flexibility depending on where you're starting from the query, and that will depend on what the user is asking for. And that's also just generally useful in your application design too. The other thing that we're actually not doing here, which is okay, is that there's a few naming patterns that will help that we've noticed, right? So one of them is making sure to use the single name of a record, so like case, and do it in a format. So you're doing like case to comments would be like the name for the comments relationship.
You're essentially explaining the direction and like the nature of the relationship and the name of that relationship, right? That's what's going on.
Exactly, yeah. And that will just be more obvious because this relationship name that we're seeing here in Record Type Designer is the metadata or information that the agent is getting. So that will just help be like the most explicit you can about what that relationship represents.
Awesome.
And I think we're, just about our time. So those are a few of the most common best practices that we've been telling people to use and we've seen results from. We'd love to hear, your feedback on what you're finding works well or not working well. That'd be great to hear. This page in particular has a ton of great content in general too that we didn't cover all of. So please check it out. Again, we sent the link in the chat earlier. And yeah, I think that's just, make use of exploring these product docs. We also have a AI content browser, right? So there's a ton of AI pages now that you can read specifically about the Copilot or search. So please check it out. There's a lot of good stuff that our information and content development teams have put together.
100%.
Yeah, we're always working to expand and improve the documentation there as well. So please make sure to check back frequently.
Yes, definitely. And we love all of the involvement you guys have been putting in the chat. So if you can give some of your feedback, we'd love for you to be part of building Appian as a product. And we will also get to some of the unanswered questions in the chat as soon as this finishes. But I did want to thank you so much again to Kevin and Derek for sharing your guys' expertise. And thank you to the audience for joining us today and for being super interactive. If you did enjoy the stream, please hit the like button to let us know. Our next stream will be in June, where we're going to be talking about record documents. So that should be very interesting. Keep your eyes out for more details, and we can't wait to see you then.
Awesome.